Firstly, thank you everyone for sort of joining and coming in today. Obviously, this is the first one. Hopefully, we will do more in the future. The group itself is at over 400 members now, and as I said before, we've got over 100 signed up to the call today, which is fantastic. So thanks very much for everyone. I'm going to hand over to Marco. Just a few first quick points. Firstly, please remember to mute so we don't get the background sound. Just sort of makes it better for everyone else. Marco is kindly doing this on his lunch break, so we will need to cap it at 1 hour. He'll do the presentation first, and then we'll open it up to Q&A afterwards. So yeah, if you could hold off, sort of stop in mid-flow, that'd be fantastic. Finally, if you yourself have a talk or presentation after watching this and you'd be keen to do it again, please just drop me a message. I mean, we're keen to make this a regular thing. So if you do have something that you're keen to share and present, please just let me know. But apart from that, I'll hand over to Marco one last time, if everyone can mute, because there's a few that's not. And Marco, I'll hand over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So can you just tell me, Tom, if you can see my screen and you can hear me well?
Yep, I can see the screen and hear you fine.
Perfect. So thanks a lot, guys, for joining me. Is there a way I can reduce this? No, I can't really close it. Okay, fine. We will deal with that. So thanks a lot, guys, for joining me today. My name is Marco. I've been a Microsoft MVP for the last 10 years. When I was first awarded, it was on the ASP.NET and IIS expertise. Now this has been rebranded in developer technologies, which sounds very broad, but I'm still very focused on anything that it's web related, web and cloud related. And today we're going to talk about probably the coolest technology that Microsoft is working on at the moment, which is Blazor. So before we get started, I usually do this kind of a poll when it's live. So I've tried to replicate this on a website. So can you guys go to this URL and tell me, what is your knowledge of Blazor? How much do you know about it? So have you had a chance to play with it? Are you already running in production, or is it the first time you hear or see about it? So yeah,
can you see the
results are going through.
Sorry, can I see the link again?
Yeah, sure. Here you go. tiny.cc-blzar. All right. So a few words have already flown through. I'll try to make this talk interesting for people who know about Blazor already, but at the same time I'll try to make sure that even people who haven't seen it yet will be able to follow it. Okay. So thanks a lot for providing the responses, and let's crack on. So what is it? What is Blazor? So Blazor is a framework that the ASP.NET team, ASP.NET Core team, is building in Microsoft, and it allows us to build single-page web applications with HTML, CSS, and C# instead of JavaScript. All right. Why is this cool? Well, first of all, because we will be able to use the Razor syntax rather than, I don't know, the Angular one or the React one, all right? And if you guys have worked with ASP.NET MVC in the past, probably you can read, you can appreciate how simple and intuitive the Razor syntax is. And also the fact that it provides you compile time checking, strong typing, and all these sort of things is really a must for web development. It's something that I really missed when I work with JavaScript, and TypeScript, yeah, helps me on that, but it's not exactly the same thing. The other cool aspect is that Blazor will be able to consume any .NET Standard library that you already have. And this will allow us to share code between, I don't know, the API, for example, and the single page application, right? So no more naming clashes, no more discrepancies between the versions, so we can just reuse code, all right? This is incredibly cool. And The third aspect is that it's not the new Silverlight, all right? So with Silverlight, if you remember it, we had to install a plugin, and this was historically the death of Silverlight itself, right? But Blazor, it's based on a W3C open standard, so it's available. It works today in pretty much any browser, right? Even in your phones. And there is a way, we will see it in a second, which allows us to run Blazor-based applications also on legacy browser, okay? So this is to say that it's an incredibly cool technology that actually comes in two different flavors. One is called Blazor WebAssembly. What is Blazor WebAssembly? Blazor WebAssembly is based on the WebAssembly W3C standard, which is the capability of running assembly-like code within within your browser. Now, so this means that practically you will be able to load a sort of a DLL onto your browser and execute it. Now, don't get scared on that. It's not like the old days of ActiveX. So you can't actually load anything that accesses your C folder, C drive on your machine. Everything runs in a sandbox, which is even more restrictive than the sandbox where JavaScript is running on. But the idea is that we have this this stack recreated by Blazor, in which if we look at it from the bottom up, we have at the lower level this WebAssembly core module, which is actually just the mono common language runtime ported to the WebAssembly standard, okay? So it's your browser being able to run the common language runtime, the CLR. And then on top of that, we have your .NET Core libraries. You have the .NET Core framework plus the libraries that you create. And part of these libraries will be running your Razor components. We will see in a second what they are. And again, this is basically the entire Blazor stack, which, given the restrictive sandbox where it is running, can't even access the DOM of the application. So it's very, very secure from this aspect, from this point of view. And Blazor comes with a piece of JavaScript code that allows us to connect these two areas together, all right? And basically will allow us to write C# code and use it to update the page that we see on the browser. But again, it's a C# code, CLR code, .NET Core code running within your browser. On top of this, this version of Blazor is currently in release candidate. It just went on RC, I think, last week. And it's going to be probably released during build next week, officially in GA. But for the time being, there is another flavor of Blazor, which is called Blazor Server. And Blazor Server is basically the same engine, exactly the same concept, with the difference that the Blazor stack runs this time on the server. But it's still a single page application, which gets updated through SignalR. So this connection that was happening between via JavaScript in a Blazor WebAssembly is going to be happening through SignalR in Blazor Server. And SignalR is in GA. It has been in GA for a while now. It's been released as part of ASP.NET Core 3.0. But obviously, for this talk, we were going to focus on the most cool part of Blazor, the most cool flavor of Blazor, which is the WebAssembly one, okay? So let's have a quick look at it. Let me just discard this. Let's have a quick look at Blazor. So in order to use Blazor WebAssembly at the moment, the only option is using Visual Studio 2019 preview version. And what you have to do is basically go into you can install the Blazor template. There's a link at the end of the presentation that tells you how. And once you select that you want to create a new Blazor app, you basically get the option of creating a WebAssembly application or a Blazor server application. And what you get out of it is a template, pretty much like this one that you can see on the top of my browser, right? So let's try to, before looking at the code, let's try to run it 1 second and see how it works. So I do a Control F5, and so the application is starting up, and this is my main the default template that you get out of it. Now, if we try to move around here on the various pages, as you can see, there are no calls being made. This is effectively a single page application. If I move to this third tab here, fetch data, there's an HTTP request that is made towards an API, right? It's pretty much like the one that you would obtain using React or Angular. So this is effectively a code which is running entirely in the browser. And where is this code located? Where if I go here on my application tab, as you can see, I have a bunch of things here actually. So let me scroll way to the bottom here. At the very bottom, you see this .NET.wasm file that has been fetched and cached locally on my browser. So this is the WebAssembly version of the Common Language Runtime. It's the component that allows you to run your DLLs. And these are the DLLs, which are pretty much well known to you guys, I'm pretty sure of it. These are the DLLs of the framework, all right? So the important things that we need to understand here is that with Blazor, we are just running plain .NET standard DLLs onto into my browser, into the context of my browser. And this will have an important implication, as we will see later, right? So we don't compile the DLLs in WebAssembly. In WebAssembly, so there's only the Common Language Runtime ported to WebAssembly. Everything else, including my Blazor demo client DLLs, are plain old DLLs, like the ones that you would run on your server side, for example, right? And well, the template, if we want to have a look at it, it's pretty simple. So it comes with a couple of pages. There's this counter, which I can click, and a counter increments, and this fetch data that we just saw before. But even though they're simple, they're good to understand how the Blazor model works under the hood. So let's have a look, for example, at the counter page. So this counter page, as you can see, is pretty much like any other Razor component that you perhaps have written before. And it comes with a page directive, which has a URL here, a path for this page. And there's a routing mechanism inside Blazor that allows you to resolve these components through this URL. And then I have this kind of Razor-like syntax to bind this part of the text here with this internal field. And here I have a button with an on-click attribute with this bizarre at here, which tells the system that this is the on-click Blazor's on-click event handler, which is pointing to increment count, which is a plain C# code. And when I code it, I get full IntelliSense, as you can see. So it's pretty much the same experience as writing, I don't know, Razor pages or ASP.NET MVC views, right? The only difference is that these eventually will be running onto the browser. And even if we have a look at the fetch data page that we've seen before, the one that fetches this kind of random weather forecast, as you can see, I'm injecting a dependency over HTTP client, and then I have a template here to render these things. We will look into that a bit more in detail in a moment. But then at the end of the day, I make an HTTP call through the HTTP client class, and again, this is ultimately in the browser, it translates into an HTML request, pretty much like the same one that you would do via JavaScript. Okay. Now, this is all cool. The only aspect that it tends to be a bit annoying when you start working with a real-world project is that embedding code, especially these code blocks with markup, etc., when the components start to become complicated, they tend to become very, very messy. So one of the aspects I've been exploring to simplify this, and there are probably different ways, but this is probably the most simple, is adopting the model view model pattern when building these components. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have been in the industry for, probably some of you have, for more than 10 years, I would say. But pretty much around 2011, there was this framework called Knockout.js. which was a library, the first porting of the model view model pattern onto the web development, right? And the person who created this library, his name is Steven Sanderson, over the years has joined Microsoft and is basically the father of Blazor. He was the one who first created Blazor as a sort of a POC and presented it to NDC Oslo a few years back. So even though the model view model pattern is not officially supported, or I would say officially branded as the pattern, as the UI pattern for Blazor, it works pretty well because of the pretty powerful data binding engine that we have in Blazor to connect my view and my view model, right? So I think that it's probably the best way to approach new applications. Again, there are better patterns like Flux or Redux, but this is probably the most intuitive one to start with. So how would I change this page in order to use the model view model pattern? So I've already done it. I need to quickly reject the changes here and switch branch to this one. And as you can see, let me go here. The first thing I've done is creating this view model, this counter view model object, all right? In which I have my title, which is the thing that I want to display on the page, and the increment method that we were seeing before. And then I've modified my counter page to, first of all, receive an instance of this counter view model object, and then just bind both the title and this event handler to the method, to the view model itself. Now, in order to be able to inject this view model in here, I also need to register it as part of the during the startup of my Blazor application. So here in my program file, I have this services object, pretty much like the one that you have in Web API, for example. So it's my IOC container in which I can just register my dependencies. Now, the reason why I really like the view model pattern applied to Blazor is that it makes some of the aspects of managing the lifecycle of the objects extremely intuitive. So for example, if we go back to the application you saw before, so as you can see here, each time I move away from the counter and I come back here, the counter always resets, right? But what I could do with, so I can obviously avoid this using my components, and there are a few ways of doing it. But if I'm using model view model, I just need to register my view model as a singleton object, and I know that this will be alive for the duration of my application. Now on Blazor WebAssembly, I recommend to use add scoped. The reason will be clear later on during the talk, but scoped and singleton have exactly the same meaning in Blazor WebAssembly, all right? So there's absolutely no difference. They will be bound for the session of the user, to the session of the user. So if I now run this piece of code, and yeah, it will take a second to compile. Unfortunately, editing continue is not there yet, so you will see me compiling a number of times. But as you can see, now I have my counter, I can add some stuff, I move away, I return here, and this is still valued 11, all right? So thanks to the model view model, I'm just reusing the same instance over and over again and for this session. But obviously, if a different user will open the same page, that user will have its own instance of the application within his browser, and therefore the two counters will not be affected with each other. Right. Cool. So this is a pretty trivial example just to get acquainted with the syntax in Blazor and the concepts of the model view model. But now let's try to make things a bit more interesting, right? Let's create something a bit more interactive. For example, a to-do list that works, that interacts with an API. And here in my project, in my solution, as you can see, I have created this Blazor demo shared library. This is a plain .NET standard library in which I have a couple of interesting classes. So one is this to-do item object, and this is going to be my entity. And as you can see, I'm also using data annotations. I'm sure that you guys know what these data annotations are about, otherwise you can guess it. And I've also created this I to the service interface. This is the service that I expected to use in order to get, add, or update to-do items, right? And then I'm referencing this library onto the server-side project, all right? Which is basically a web API project. So I have my implementation of I to the service based on entity framework to save it, to save the data on the database. And I also have a controller here that exposes these primitives, basically. Now, the nice thing about Blazor is that I can do pretty much the same thing on the client side. So in my Blazor client project, this one, which again will run on the browser, I also have a reference to exactly the same project, right? And this time I just created an implementation of I to do service, which uses HTTP client. Okay, but again, if I make a change to do item, if I add new members to the I to do interface, there's no risk of misaligning the client and the server. I will get a compilation error, for example, if I add the member to delete a to do item and this class is not implementing it, right? Cool. So how can I use this? Again, since we're using the model view model pattern, I can just create a new class, which I can call to do items view model. I prefer to start from this, from the view model side, and I've created a code snippet here because you don't want to see me typing. But basically, in this class, I'm just using this service and exposing a bunch of properties I might use in my interface, right? So, for example, the list of items, the list of outstanding items, which I calculate on the fly through link, a method to load the data, the count of the items left, these sort of things, method to complete an item, and so on and so forth. Cool. So once we have this view model, we can now create a to-do list component. So I created this to-do list component, and I also have a code snippet for this one. Let me just remove this code here, in which I'm injecting the to-do items view model, and if when the data is loaded, I'm just rendering it through this list of basically checkboxes, all right? In which I'm using this attribute here, bind. I'm binding the check the state to the is completed property of a single item. This is a new attribute in Blazor, which represents a two-way data binding. So I can read from this property when rendering the checkbox, but the moment the user clicks on that, it will also update the underlying object. All right. So it's pretty much the usual two ways data binding that I would expect. Now I need to also load the data when this page first loads, and I can use this code snippet here. So you still need some code here on the page, but the code is reduced to the minimum. And here, when the component initializes, I just need to call the load async method. All right. Now, before I run this, I need to do another couple of things. First of all, I need to go here onto the menu and uncomment this, so we will see a link to this new page. And also, I need to register my view model onto the IOC container, and I have another snippet for that. Right. So here I'm registering both the to-do items view model and the implementation of my I to do service interface. Okay, so let's run this and see if it works. So I recompile the application. Okay. It loads, and now I have my to-do list here. I go there, and as you can see, I'm actually receiving something. So I'm fetching the data from the API controller, and I'm seeing this. Now, it's very, very simple as an example, but it already gives us a couple of interesting points to evaluate. So first of all, as you can see, when I tick the boxes, the count and the list of items is updated on the fly, right? So Blazor knows that it needs to re-render this part of the screen automatically, and actually the two-way data binding is working as expected, right? Because I'm just ticking the box and is completed, the completed property is being updated automatically. Obviously, I'm not saving in anything yet, but it's a good start. The other interesting thing is that when I first loaded it, you've seen for a second this loading label here. And the reason why you see this is because I'm loading the item within an asynchronous method. So Blazor is clever enough when I'm doing this initialization within an asynchronous method to first render the page when the synchronous part of this method completes, right? So when load async is being called, but has not provided any results yet. And in that case, is loaded will be false, and therefore I see this loading label here, and then automatically trigger another rendering when load async completes, this time showing me actually the data, right? Unfortunately, okay. Cool. We will have then a Q&A session later on after the talk if you want to ask questions, by the way. Cool. So I think it's a good start for our journey with Blazor, but let me show you another cool feature that we can easily plug into our application. So I told you before that Blazor is basically the common language runtime running on the browser and being able to execute any DLL that we need. So this means that any .NET standard NuGet package or DLL that makes sense to run on the browser can be executed through Blazor. Okay, we can use it within our project. So obviously, I can't use an entity framework because that would mean that I would need to interact with with port 1433 and connect to the database, and that is obviously not possible from within the browser. But for example, I don't know if you guys know something, a package called Polly. So Polly is a NuGet package, is a library that implements a lot of patterns, such as a retry pattern or failovers or things like that to deal with, I don't know, intermittent connectivity between the browser and the server or things like that, right? And this is a library that makes absolutely sense to use within the browser, all right? Even if it wasn't designed to work on Blazor, we will see that it just works on Blazor, right? So I've now added the NuGet package to my solution. I just need to go here onto my program class, and I can just add the registration of a policy object. All right. So here, for example, I'm just saying, look, handle an exception and just retry it 10 times by logging. This console write line will actually write onto the browser console. Just retry 10 times and write a log every time you try it. All right. And I can then go here on my HTTP to-do service and replace this class with this other one, in which I'm actually using this policy, right? And when I try to load everything async, all right, I'm calling this within the context of the policy that I just created. I just defined my program class, all right? And here, as you can see, I'm calling this problematic endpoint, right? So let me start this and we will have a look at it. So this is basically an endpoint, which is pretty much the get endpoint, apart from the fact that it fails, it fails 60% of the times, right? And now, if I open my network tab and I go to my to-do list, oh, I was incredibly lucky. It didn't fail. Let me just refresh this. Yeah, you see, it failed 2 times now. But Polly has automatically retried it. And at the third call, it was a successful, right? And again, this is a something that I used to use on the server-side code when I have tons of microservices that need to interact with each other, but I never thought about using it within the browser, and probably not even the authors of Polly have thought about that, but it just works on Blazor, and this I think is incredibly cool, right? Cool, let's go back to our code, because it's probably time to start saving in the database that I've ticked some boxes, right? So let's see how we can call a viewModel method when I tick a box here. So the way I can do it is by using this onChange attribute. So here, what I'm saying is that when the tick over this checkbox changes, you need to call this complete item async, and this is also interesting. So you pass the instance of the item I used. So this is the to-do item, right? That I used to render this line. So I can pass an entire reference to the object to my method. It's pretty much like I would do in WPF, for example. The only thing that is that now I'm getting an error because internally bind also uses this onChange attribute, and you can't use it twice. So the way you can change this is just by using a one-way data binding, which is this one. So I'm just binding the content of is completed onto the checked attribute of this checkbox, and then internally in this complete item async, I will effectively change the status to is completed equals to true, right? Let's see how this works. So I go to the same page, and now if I click here on third, there are 2 items to complete. I refresh the page, and effectively this has been stored. I even have a database, the database here, and as you can see, it has been moved to true. Now let me put it back to false. There's only one little glitch. So if I refresh this page now and I click on first, yeah, you see what happens. So this is because I have a list of 3 items, and Blazor can't really recognize whether the third item has disappeared, and the other 2 have just changed the label. They all look the same to the engine, to the rendering engine. So the easy way to fix this is giving a hint to the rendering engine, saying with this key attribute, right? And we can just set it to anything that changes across the 3 lines, even the entire item object. Okay. And once we do it, we will see in a second that the list box, the list here should behave as expected. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now I have just 1 item left, so probably it's time to start working on the feature of adding new items to my to-do list. How I can do it? Well, again, the starting point for me, the most natural starting point is the viewModel. And more specifically, I can add a bunch of additional members to my viewModel. So for example, the new item I want to add, and this method add a new item async that will call the API, basically, right? And then I can go back to my page here, and at this point, I can add some additional markup like this one. Cool. So what do we have here? We have this component called edit form, which is basically the equivalent in Blazor of an HTTP form, HTML form, sorry, in which I'm saying that every time you do a valid submit, you need to call this viewModel add a new item async. And internally here within the form, I have my text box, which is bound to the description of the new item. All right, plus a submit button. The other interesting thing, and I believe, I'm sure you can guess what they are these 2 markup elements, data annotations validator and validation summary. Guess what is the behavior of those 2 things? Is handling the data annotations that I have on my to-do item. So if you recall it, here I've set that the description is a required element, right? So if I go now to my to-do list, I will see that I have my input form here, but the moment I try to add it, I get this description field is required. So data annotations work on Blazor as well, right? But then I can add number 4, and this gets added to the application, to the list, all right? And if I go to my database, I can demonstrate that I'm not cheating. I actually have this number 4 here. Now, there's one aspect I don't like about this interface. So the moment I type number 5, for example, and I press enter, you can't see me typing, but you see I lose the focus from this text box. And I'd really like to have to retain this focus so I can keep adding many elements one after the other, right? Just by typing them and pressing enter. But unfortunately, I needed to set the focus here first. Now, this is where I misled you guys, unfortunately, and I'm sorry for that. Unfortunately, at the moment, given the restrictions of WebAssembly, there's no way WebAssembly can interact with the DOM directly, and there's no built-in way to set the focus to an element via C# or via the WebAssembly, via the Blazor framework, okay? So this is where we basically needed to rely on the old JavaScript. So the real claim is not C# instead of JavaScript, is a C# with a little bit of JavaScript. And by the way, this is one of the features that the team is working on, is planning to add in the near future. So having the ability to set the focus to elements directly via C#. But for the time being, the only thing we can do is using JavaScript. And in order to use JavaScript within Blazor, we need to add an instance of IJS runtime. Okay, this is the gateway for our C# code to talk to JavaScript. And what I can do here is adding some code like this, in which basically I have this submit button, this submit method, sorry, that I'm going to call here when the form is submitted. So this is going to be this.submit. And what I'm going to do here is adding the new item async and changing this flag set focus to true, all right? And then I will have this override for on after render, in which if set focus is true, I invoke this utils.setFocus JavaScript function, passing two things: a container, which we don't know what it is yet, and the JavaScript, the jQuery selector for my element. All right. And what is this set focus here? So this is a piece of code that I've added. So if you look at the this is the HTML hosting page for my my Blazor application. I've referenced this site.js file, which I have here, and here I've just created this set focus function within the windows.utils object. And here I'm accepting an element, a container element, a selector to look into from within this element, and then I'm calling the focus method. Why am I doing that? Well, because here I'm searching for a form input type equals text, and there could be many of those during the page. So I want to actually set the focus to that very element that I have in this page. Now, I need to find something that represents my container, and actually, this is a good candidate. So this is the outermost div of my component, right? So here I can just say ref equals to my container field. So the reference to this HTML element would be bound to this guy, to this field here, which I will then pass to JavaScript. This is a plain HTML element reference, all right? And now that I've done it, I can just run my application again. And if I've done things right, and I go here, yeah, I will be able to add an element, press enter, and I retain the focus here. okay? And you can use a JavaScript for a number of different things. So for example, if you have a, I don't know, a visual library that you want to use, perhaps, I don't know, you're using Bootstrap, and Bootstrap comes with a number of JavaScript features, such as, for example, the popover functionality. So you have a button, you have a data toggle popover, and basically, if you run a code like this one, you will activate that feature on an element. Well, you can use pretty much the same approach here as well. So I can write something like this. So still within my on after rendering async, if it's the first render of the page, search for anything, just run register popover over this this very same container, right? And the moment I execute this, so register popover will just, let's go and have a look at it. We'll just look for anything that has data toggle equals to popover, and will basically create this effect here. All right. Now, this is another aspect in which in the real world project, you must be very, very careful, because what we've done here is that we've modified the DOM of the page through JavaScript in a way that Blazor, that is completely hidden to Blazor. So Blazor doesn't know about this new piece of markup. Now, it might be fine for most of the times. So it seems to work fine, but unfortunately, the moment I move away from this component, Blazor doesn't know that it needs to clean up this piece of markup as well, right? So what is the takeaway here? We need to make sure that any changes that we make to the DOM is correctly disposed manually if done through JavaScript. And the way you do it is, for example, by calling this unregister popover function that will dispose this. And the way you call it is when you are basically destroying this element. And there's obviously the interface that does that is iDisposable. So I can just implement iDisposable on my component, and here I can just go and implement my dispose method to call unregister popover. I run this again, and we will see that it will now work correctly. So this is something you must be conscious of when you're working on a project and you want to reuse your favorite libraries. So right now, if I move away, as you can see, the code is cleaning up the markup. Cool. So now we have a fully functioning to-do list feature. And by the way, thanks to Polly, even though the get endpoint is failing 60% of the times, we haven't noticed it. So this is a good achievement, even because it was super simple to get there. The other interesting thing you can do with Blazor is basically creating a component libraries. All right. So, for example, I have created this shared components project. This is another plain component library, Razor component library, and it's a .NET standard library in which I have, for example, this component, loader.razor, that I can use within my application. So what is the idea here? So this is the typical spinner that I want to display when, for example, I'm doing a long-running operation. Okay, and once if I just create this and I go to my onto my application, my Blazor client application, and I perhaps open this app.razor, which is the outermost component in Blazor, the one that contains the routing and all these sort of things, I can just put an instance of my loader here, and I can just type anything I want inside it. So for example, something like that. I don't know. Right, something fancy like this. And the way this loader component works is that it uses internally this iLoader service, which has a Boolean property show. All right, so the idea is that when I run a long-lasting operation, I call load async. Load async will set show to true when it starts, and show to false when load async completes, basically. And then when show is true, I will just display any child content that I've put in my application, all right, in an overlay. Cool. So in order to use it, I need to go here and go to my program file, if I can find it. And how much time do I have? Yeah, I have another 10 minutes. Am I right, Tom? Do I have another 10 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, as long as you can go, really.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So I have created this extension method, which is called addLoader. And this will basically register the iLoader interface for me. And again, we'll register it as a scope, so shared across all the objects in my application, all right? And then how do I use it? Well, for example, I can go onto my to-do items view model, and I can add a reference to iLoader service, collect loader. Let me add the using. Okay, and I can just do loader equals to loader. And then perhaps when I load everything, I can just do await loader.load async. And this is an asynchronous lambda like this one. And I can put this code in here, okay? So this will execute my get all async within the loader, and hopefully will display my, my spinner in the application, the spinner that I have defined in the component library. So let's try to run it and see if it works. Okay, so let's show the console here, go to my to-do list, and I don't see the loader. So I can see that I've logged that I'm setting show to true and false, but unfortunately, I don't see anything in my screen. I didn't see this overlay that I was claiming I had built. Why is that? Well, in order to explain this, I need to go back to the slides one sec. And most importantly, I need to explain what the implications are when we're sharing the same view model between different components. So what's happening here? So we have two components. One is my to-do list and one is the loader, okay? When I render the to-do list, I call load async, and this will basically generate some markup that is displayed on the browser, okay? At the same time, load async will use the iLoader service, which will initially set show to true. And in my loader object, I expect to react to this show being set to true and render my loader in over the page, right? But unfortunately, this is not happening because in order to optimize performance, Blazor is doing a selective rendering over the components. So it doesn't render everything on my page. It only renders the elements of the DOM, the components that have received an explicit event. So for example, have been navigated to, there has been a click for the user or something like that, right? And obviously this loader object hasn't received anything. So that's why Blazor is ignoring it. Another example of this, which is probably a bit more clear, is if we go back to our project and perhaps in my index page, I just add 3 instances of my counter object, right? And when I run the application, if you remember, all these objects are using the counter view model, which is registered as a scoped, right? So it's shared across these 3 objects. Now, when I click one, I can see that only one is actually being rendered because this is the only component that has received the click event. Even though, if the moment I click in here, the value is a 7. This is because they're reusing the same instance of the view model. It's just that they've been excluded from the rendering phase. So we need to force the rendering for these components when something happens. And one of the most intuitive ways I've found in order to do that is by using the notify property changed interface. I hope you guys know about it, but this is basically one of the, so this is an interface that has been in the .NET framework since version 1.0 in 2002. And it's basically an interface that contains a single member, this property changed event, which I can use to send a signal that something has changed onto my object. So for example, I can say this dot property changed dot invoke, and here I need to pass my reference and a new property change event args, for example, name of title. Okay. Is this, I can obviously do the same thing in my iLoader service interface, right? Internally, in my implementation of this loader service, I've already implemented iNotify property changed. Okay, so is this enough? Unfortunately not, because Blazor doesn't know anything about iNotify property changed. So we need to tweak it a little bit, and we can do it using this reactive. This is a custom class I've built called the reactive component base. It inherits from component base, which is the base class for every Blazor component, even your counters, to-do list, and so on and so forth, in which I'm doing something that looks complicated, but it's actually not. So what am I doing here? So when I initialize the component, what I do is that I look for all the properties that have a reader that have been injected, right? So something like, where is it? Where's my counter? Something like this, right? That has the inject attribute. And then for each of these objects, if they implement iNotify property changed, what I'm doing is that I'm subscribing to the event, all right? And when this event happens, I trigger this code here, which will call state has changed. The state has changed is a component, it's a method of the component-based class, which will which allows us to signal to Blazor that it needs to render also this component, even though it falls outside of the performance optimization I was mentioning before. And obviously, I'm also removing all the subscriptions when I dispose the component to avoid any memory leaks. Okay, so if I do this, then I only need to go to my counter object and say that this guy inherits from reactive component base. Okay, and I can do the same on my loader object here, right? So this one will inherit from reactive component base. Now let's see what happens. So I do Control F5 once again. And this time, when I load the index page and I have the 3 counters, if I click on one element, now also the other 2 are being rendered, okay? So they're all in sync regardless to where I click. And if I go to my to-do list, I finally see the loading as I was expecting, okay? Cool. The time is pretty much over. I might, there's another quick thing I wanted to show you, which is how to use the code that we've written in a Blazor server fashion. So right now we've been using a Blazor client. I also have a Blazor server project. So how expensive is to port the code from a Blazor client to Blazor server and vice versa? So here I'm talking, just to be clear, I'm talking about this second flavor of Blazor, right? So it turns out that it's pretty simple. What I have here, what I've done here is just adding a reference to my Blazor demo.client project, which is the one that we've been using so far. And the other thing I need to do is when I go here on my, on my startup class where I register all my dependencies, here I need to register the dependencies for the same objects. So my counter view model, to-do items, and so on and so forth, right? The only difference is that now, since this code, the logic of my code is running on the server side, I do have access to the database. So there's no need to make HTTP calls. I can just go directly through Entity Framework. All right. So let's see. But apart from that, it's so all is exactly the same. Or the other interesting thing I wanted to point out is that is the reason why I initially registered a singleton object as a scoped. The reason is that scoped is scoped to an individual user session, both on a Blazor client, a Blazor WebAssembly, and in Blazor server. But obviously, if this was a singleton, that would have been shared across all the users of my server-side application, right? So for this reason, it's probably easiest to never use a singleton in the client side and just use a scope, just because to have a consistency between the behaviors between Blazor server and the Blazor WebAssembly. But now if I run, so now I'm running the Blazor server-side application, and we can see this because if I refresh this, as you can see, I have this negotiate call that connects to SignalR on the server side, and I have a WebSocket session open, right? But apart from that, everything works exactly in the same way as before, right? So this one works. If I go to the list, I see my loader. This is way quicker than before. So my JavaScript integration works. Even the completion is just, okay, this is probably clicked too fast and I've broken it. But yeah, I definitely broke something. So the completion works, toggle popover, the dispose, everything is exactly the same. This is the same code we've been playing for the duration of the talk. And again, it's very, very easy and transparent to port it between server side and client side. Cool, guys, I think that's really it. If you have questions, hit me either now for the next 5-10 minutes if you want, or just, yeah, get in touch by email or on Twitter. You can get the code that I've used during this presentation here on this GitHub repository. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk.
That's great. Thanks very much, Marco. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to address now?
Yeah, may I ask a question? Hello?
Hello? Yeah, I can.
How big is the bundle size? For example, if I create a public website, right, and a user navigates the first time to my website, how big is the bundle? Because it needs to load all those WebAssemblies, all those DLLs, am I right?
Yes. So this is a very, very interesting question. So at the moment is a couple of megabytes. Okay, so it's fairly small, but it's non-negligible if you're on a 3G connection, for example. However, there are a few aspects that we need to point out here. So first of all, the team is actively working on a shrinking system that will strip out the pieces of the framework that you don't use in order to limit the size of the assemblies. But at the same time, most of the libraries, the .NET Core libraries, are probably are things that you can put on a CDN, for example, right? And therefore, perhaps have the chance to have them already cached if the user has browsed to another Blazor application which was using the same version of the .NET Core framework, basically. Right. So again, it's cached after the first time. The first time is only a couple of megabytes, but I think there's a good use case for CDN here.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Anyone else?
I've seen something on the chat. Great session. Are there any questions here? No, just compliments. Okay, I appreciate it.
Really great feedback, Marco. So obviously, well done for that. It's gone down very well. Thank you, everyone.
I think someone else was asking something.
Okay, I was just going to ask how big are Microsoft going to go on kind of pushing Blazor, because obviously it's trying to steal market share from React and Angular, and obviously they're going to need to plow in a big way if they're going to kind of move people to the new platform.
Yeah, that's another great question. So I can't answer for Microsoft here, but my impression is that there's a substantial investment. So ASP.NET Core, if you think about it, is pretty much feature complete, right? So the big of the effort of that team is going towards Blazor at the moment. On the other end, I don't think that realistically this will share, will steal a substantial portion of the market to React or Angular, right? Anytime soon. Realistically, I don't think this is something we foresee happening. But at the same time, I can tell you this: as a web developer, I felt being degraded to a web API developer when all these client-side frameworks, I don't know if it's your experience as well, but when these client frameworks took off, basically, yeah, I basically, either I was given a choice. So either you learn that or you kind of be stuck on the back end side of it. So basically just use a web API. And I think that Blazor, for all these people that that were lazy at that time, like me, is a good opportunity to easily become full stack developers once again, all right, without having to learn the nuances of React or Angular from scratch, basically.
Great, thanks, Marco. It was a really good presentation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Hi, may I ask one question?
Sure.
Okay, it's a quick one. Maybe you know what is the future status for the Blazor mobile bindings? Is there any chance to get something serious with that?
So I think that now it's still at the experimental level. I don't know, because it's kind of a conflicting with another product that Microsoft is selling with, which is Xamarin, right? So I'm not really sure how much investment will be done on that, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing anything serious with that at the moment.
I know. I'm asking because I did some POC with Xamarin basically, and Blazor bindings, and that works, you know. Yeah, so
yeah, it might be that yeah, to be honest, this is an even bigger niche, even smaller niche than just Blazor itself. So I'm not sure how much investment will be done in that.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, guys. Does that mean that the target market is really people who don't want to learn JavaScript? I wouldn't say so. I would say that probably people who have missed the train for being full stack developers will find it very intuitive and easy to become full stack developers again, thanks to Blazor. On the other end, I also think that the capability of sharing the code between the server side and the client side is something really, really invaluable, which I believe that any one of you guys that have worked in projects in which you have, for example, React.js on the front end and a web API on the back end will have faced at least once in the past, right? So having the two front end and back end becoming misaligned because of I don't know, a property that changes names or type, and it's not reflected on the UI. So the capability of sharing code, even logic, is really, really invaluable to me. All right, I think that's it, guys. Just get in touch on Twitter or by email if you have any further questions. I really like to talk about technology with anyone. So yeah, please do it. All right. Thanks a lot for your time and for being here.
Okay. Bye. Yep. Thank you, Mark, on behalf of everyone. And yeah, as mentioned before, if anyone else has a presentation talk they'd like to share, please drop me a message on the meetup. Keen to do another one as soon as possible. So thanks very much, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.